Good evening and welcome to this edition of the Halcyon Show. My name's Lorne Risley, host of the show. How you doing? Gonna be a weird one. This is a more of a musing video than it is anything in particular. I've been thinking about doing a live stream for a few days, and I was going backwards and forwards about what I wanted to talk about because I knew I wanted to do a live stream, but I didn't want it to be, focusing on anything too vacuous. And I arrived at the notion of control. And I want to first of all elaborate what prompted me to talk about control more specifically as a result of where else I was driving. And what happened was I pulled up to a roundabout near where I live, and an exchange between two of the gentlemen prompted this moment in my mind where I thought, you know what, this would be interesting to talk about. Can I be here? Can I be here? I'll be here. Okay. So to cut a very long story short, the driver of the first car was right on my right-hand side, having pulled up, waited for an opportunity to, exit onto the roundabout. The driver of the second car, a red people carrier, I think it was a Volkswagen actually, one of those big camper van ones, had sort of made a point to stop on the roundabout because the first car had kind of edged its way into its path, right? Now, the VW could have very easily just gone around, right? But no, he made a point of emasculating and humiliating. I think it was a Merc driver or a BMW. It was a German car manufacturer driver, and just bibbing at him, honking at him, all the rest of that sort of stuff. And the guy was bemused, like he didn't really know what to make of it. And he kind of looked over at me, and I looked over both of them, and I kind of gestured to the guy, look, just move backwards a bit, right? He moves backwards a little bit. The other guy doesn't respond accordingly, just kind of drives off pissed off. Sorry about that, by the way. Just realised how... fucking soundboard. Just sort of drives off and doesn't really acknowledge the fact that the guy... And the other guy looks at me as if to say, what the fuck is this guy's problem, right? And then we go around the roundabout, and this guy now is incensed. So he's speeding, he's up other people's asses, and he's sort of fucking doing all the rest of that sort of stuff. And it led me to this notion of control. It's funny to me how often I'm tempted to lose control over my emotions a lot. The main reason is because I find that whenever I lose my temper, I have a habit of getting what I want in the situation or a scenario. I can be very it can be very difficult to deal with when I'm pissed off because I become very singular-minded. I become very difficult to deal with on a one-to-one basis, but that's usually because in my own mind, I've already extended to you enough of a courtesy to warrant getting one thing back. Take the recent unpleasantries for a second. I was labelled as being entitled. I had that thrown at me a lot. And my response to that would be, well, entitlement would be something along the lines of I feel like I'm entitled to something because I didn't do anything to earn it. And that's just not the case. I work my fucking ass off to get the things that I get. I don't get a lot. So the little that I get, I feel not an entitlement. I feel like I fucking earned it. But my point there is that when I feel like that earning hasn't been fulfilled, it's very difficult for me to retain control over my emotions and my emotional state to the point where it's very easy for me to kind of zone in on a person, highlight their weaknesses and their insecurities, and kind of really bear in on them in a way that always makes me feel uncomfortable in hindsight, because it taps into something in me that I resent is there. And it's also because it's a failure to retain control. And the reason why that's a failure is because I feel like when you can command yourself and retain control over yourself in various situations, you always get the outcome that you're happiest looking back that you got. Whereas when you lose your temper, even if it panned out for you in the moment, there's always a part of you that looks back on it with a tinge of regret, because you're like, man, I didn't have to make that person feel like shit. I didn't have to make that person feel scared or any of that sort of stuff. And I wrestled with how to talk about this, because one of the things that I think at the moment is so prevalent in our society, and this is why this was difficult to wrestle with. I was going to talk about rage. I was going to talk about the riots. I was going to talk about discourse on social media with the American presidency run and a lot of stuff going on there. I was going to talk about the Laura Woods thing because that seems to have spiraled because social media is the social media. But all of these kind of nebulous ideas always came back to me to the notion of control. Like why it's so important for everyone to retain control, and yet it seems to me, and I could be wrong, and this is an assessment that I'm happy to have questioned, is that no one really is in control of themselves at the moment. It's very much a case of everyone kind of does whatever they think and feel is right or justified in a moment. And the reason I feel that way is because I feel that way. I feel like a lot of times my predisposition is to react in accordance with my own morality and my own sense of duty and justice and, you know, what I think I can get away with and stuff like that. Whereas it didn't used to be that way. It used to be very much a case where you acted in accordance with what everyone else's expectations were, and you controlled yourself in line with the fact that people would be disappointed in you, or they would like you. You know what I mean? We don't really have that at the moment. I want to talk about some of its, some of why I think that rage is something that stems from a lack of control. I talked about that scenario at the beginning. That guy who was, again, he just pulled up to a roundabout. He wasn't looking to piss anybody off, and I don't think he really made a mistake. He was maybe a couple of feet over the line. The guy in the Volkswagen Caddy or whatever it was, I noted again, in the split second, you pick up on these little things in a moment, but in the split second, I saw that he was with his family. He'd obviously had his kids in the back, his missus in the seat. And I feel like a lot of the time at the moment, and this is probably more prevalent with men, I can't speak to women about this, but I know this because, again, it's me, is you feel the need to exert control over other aspects of your life or the world when you feel like you don't have control over your own life. In that situation, I don't want to speak for the guy. I've never met him and I'll never meet him again. But I imagine his kids were on his back. He was traveling from somewhere. You know, he was pulling off of a motorway, so he was coming into a town, presumably coming back from a vacation or a holiday or a trip or whatever. You know, backseat drivers all the way. And he gets this roundabout and he gets this mild inconvenience. And he feels like this is his moment. This is the moment he can take to exert some control over the situation, even if it's at the expense of another individual. Which then led to this other guy speeding off and exerting control by just fucking leathering it from pip to pip to pip to pip. Now, is he justified in doing that? Of course not. In his own mind, he probably is, though, because he feels like, right, fuck it, I've tried to be nice, fuck it, time's come to not be nice. And this is why I wanted to muse about this, because I have a strong sense of duty. It bites me more often than it helps me. I'll say it, and I know I'm going to get in trouble. I don't, if you're watching this and you go, who said it? I don't care. Go fuck yourselves. With the battle rap thing, part of my duty and responsibility I felt was to point out where I thought there were inconsistencies, wrongdoing, failures, and just low points, right? And I got my ass kicked for it because it felt to them that I was spiting them. When I see things in the street, like, we have a pretty bad drug problem around where I live at the moment, where people are pretty consistently really, really high. Like, really, like, they can't function. They can't, when you talk, it's just gibberish. They can't make eye contact with anything. They're struggling to maintain their equilibrium. And it's not an inconsistent thing. It's happening almost every day. Part of my duty there is to tell them to pack it in, mainly because it doesn't affect me. It affects people like kids, mums, older folks, disabled folks who might be threatened by it. I often think about things through that prism of trying to maintain control over things, not for myself, but for people that can't exert that control. Because not only do I worry about them from a human perspective, I worry about, as a result of like that guy at the roundabout who had something done to him, control was taken away from him, so he then had to exert control in another way by becoming a dangerous driver. I worry about how people exert control in their own lives when something's done to them. And again, that factors in again to the morality issue, because I think people are very quick to anger at the moment. I know I can be. I know I can be really, really quick to anger sometimes. And it's difficult for me to admit that, because all my life, I have struggled with my temper because, again, unfortunately, it has the desired effect of getting what I want. If I lose my temper, I tend to get what I want when I'm pissed off. Let me move over a little bit so I'm a bit more in frame. And I think a lot of other people feel the same. The lack of consequence, the lack of any real reaffirmment in doing the right thing for the sake of doing the right thing. It all just seems to stem from this feeling of a lack of control in their own lives. Now, I didn't want to just come and point all this out because, again, pointing things out and critiquing things isn't necessarily helpful. What's helpful is having solutions to these problems. And I wanted to come to you with what I've started to use as solutions to some of my problems when it comes to exerting control. I'm going to start with the first one because it's the most prevalent one and it happened this week. I won't name names because I still have a lot of respect for the individual concerned. And it's a shame that they felt the way they did, but they're allowed to feel however they want to feel. I got ringed because I shared some of my YouTube videos this week in an attempt to try and promote some of the videos and, just try and, keep some traction on my channel while I'm working on a new series, which I'll talk about on another episode today. I just wanted to muse. You don't have to watch this one if you don't want to. One of the people whose shows I shared, or I shared a bunch of playlists actually, took issue with it. So don't include me. Don't reference me, all the rest of that sort of stuff. And I was upset by that because I was disappointed, but I was also upset by it because I also had explained to this person the reasoning behind why I'd done something else, which is everyone in the UK battle rap community I've unfollowed. I've unfollowed and made them. You can also go on Twitter and you can unfollow people from you. You can get rid of them as a follower. I did this for two reasons. Number one, because at the moment, talking about it and seeing anything related to it it's hard for me to not react. It's hard for me to not feel a tinge of something. And I don't want to. I don't need to. I'm under no obligation to. Social media is mine and yours, and however you want to navigate it is entirely up to you. You can mute people, block people, get rid of people, change your profile. If you want to be an anonymous profile user, then that's your right to do so. There's no obligation to anybody for any reason. But this person took issue with that. I imagine for a couple of different reasons. But again, my response was, well, there was nothing wrong with you picking up a fucking phone and just calling me and saying it, or messaging me and saying it. But then again, looking at it from their perspective, I don't know if they don't live in a world of social media, and that's how they see the world. And the reason I say it that way is because I think social media and the pandemic and the way social media played out in the pandemic has affected how people treat each other now. People have a very numerical way of looking at people. They lose that human element to talking to a person. The reason I make reference to that is because one of the things that I've noticed is when I get someone one-on-one, I can usually have a pretty decent conversation with someone. I can make what I'm trying to say make sense, and I can make sure my intent is clear. When I'm around other people, or they adopt a different personality, they adopt a different tendency in behavior, and it makes them very difficult to talk to in that moment. That's why I tend to avoid it. And I think especially on social media, people have enlarged egos. They have warped perceptions of themselves, and I think they also have warped perceptions of other people. They look at people a certain way because of how black and white, lacking in nuance, like me, don't like me formatting it is. It's a very bad way of looking at the world and looking at people. And I think that the illusion of control in that sense is what I hate the most about it, because again, I muted and blocked people. I didn't say the second reason. The second reason was because what I also didn't want is I didn't want my affiliation with anybody to adversely affect anybody. Again, because of the way that the unique way that social media is, it's very, very easy for people who have large followings to establish narratives that they want permeated, and no one's ever really going to question it publicly. They'll only ever talk about it behind the scenes. And that's a problem. That's a big, 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 big problem. And I don't like that. And so the fact that I don't like it doesn't make a difference to the fact that if I tweet something at that point and then someone looks at it and says, well, I like what Lorne's saying, but I'd rather not. Because they don't want to deal with the blowback from fuckers who want to go after them, then it just seemed like an easier alternative to take that option out of their hands and just say, right, nope, I'll take that responsibility. I'll shoulder that blame. It's me. I got rid of everybody because I didn't want to see anything, and I also didn't want to have to deal with anybody looking at my stuff and refusing to like it or retweet it because they don't want to deal with assholes that go after them because... how do I say this? There's another reason why I deal with people better in person. It's because I can look people in the eye and let them know if they speak out of line, I'm not above giving them a smack. And I'm not proud of that fact. I'm not proud of... because that aggressive tendency, that ability to be able to just turn off in a moment and look straight through. I do this and I don't like it. I don't like that it's in me. I really don't. But there are times where I get genuinely mad and I'll fucking look through a person. You're no longer a human to me now. You're an obstacle to overcome. You are a threat. You are an enemy, and I must fucking obliterate you. And I will make no bones about it. And I hate that. I really do. And social media brings that out in me a lot, especially because of the recent happenings, right? So it just seemed like, again, the best way to deal with that was to get rid of everybody. I exerted control over my situation. Now, I have to tell you, since then, minus this blip, it's been fucking beautiful, man. I have to be brutally honest with you. Not having notifications in my fucking DMs, not having retweets and my name mentioned by people, it's been fucking beautiful, man. I gotta tell you. And just that little motion of control, at the expense, granted, of perception of people, is well worth that trade for me, because it has allowed me this week to manage and recover and recoup, lead a balanced existence way more easily than if I'd have just sort of persevered with it. And it was hard to make that decision. I don't want to say it wasn't hard to make that decision, especially since, I'd already made the decision to not cover it anymore. But again, this is the other thing that I do like about myself. I have a tendency to play down on myself, but this is something I do like about myself. I'm never above recognizing a bad idea is a bad idea and just stopping. The person in question, this did hurt my feelings a little bit, because I hate when people say this about me, because it's a fundamental misunderstanding of who I am and what I am. Mentally, you're all over the place, was the phrase. And my point there was, no, not even a little bit. I make decisions when it becomes apparent that what you're doing is the wrong thing. I'm happy to persevere with a good idea even through resistance. I'm never happy to persevere with a bad idea. When it's objectively the wrong thing to do, I'm not complicit to continue to pursue that line of thought. I have to exert control in that moment to say, no, that doesn't resonate with me. Cut. We're done. It's over. We need to do something different. We need to just stop it. Need to eliminate it. Whatever it is. One of the things that I think control can have its benefits of, especially if you're trying to find its uses, is in achieving a goal, in achieving something that you're currently unable to attain. But that control often comes at the expense of a sacrifice. Let's take another example. Let's take the weight loss and weight gain, right? Because I'm notorious for talking about that, so I might as well talk about it here too. Do you want to know why it's hard? It's not hard putting in the work for weight training. Like lifting stuff and just going for the occasional run or skip is just something you get into the habit of. It's the temptation. Temptation is what the killer is as far as weight loss and training is concerned. There's a reason I don't shop more than 2 or 3 days in advance, because if I get hungry or bored, I'm gonna eat that shit. I have to control what is in my house, because I know that having that inability to resist temptation is something about me that I can inhibit, but I have to be cognizant of what I'm exposing myself to in order to stay in control. And that sacrifice is not one that comes lightly, man. Like I say, it often gets worse when I have my kids, because of course my kids don't eat raw steak and fucking rice and that's it. You know, they eat junk because they're kids. It's harder then, sure, but that's when you have to, again, exert a little bit more control over the situation. And I think that one of the things that people, again, get out of having a lack of control sometimes is this inconsistency that allows them to forego responsibility when comparing it to other people. I'm conflating a few things here, but bear with me. Let's go to the riots for a second, because again, I'd been meaning to talk about this, because in the town where I live, they were talking about it, and luckily though, mine was one of the towns that kind of counter-protested very successfully, and I was very proud of my town when I saw that. I was very happy to see that sort of the negativity that could have permeated as a result of all that's going on in the world right now was quashed and quelled. However, one of the things that worried me was the sort of celebratory defeating of the what do you want to call them, protesters, I guess. The counter protesters being non-fascists, protesters being at least somewhat fascistic in their approach to immigration. Now here's the thing with that, and this is where I might ruffle some feathers, and I apologize for that. And I mention this because I do think that this is lost on some people, is that you can't just get rid of people that don't agree with you. You can on social media. You can narrate, and you can edit, and you can block and mute and all the rest of that sort of stuff. But social media is not real life. The people that were rioting over the last couple of weeks, or the people that were causing a lot of the violent protests and you know, committing all sorts of fucking horrible crimes and stuff, these people are your neighbors. They are people that you work with, or that frequent shops and places of business that you will frequent. These are people that work in the medical profession, in the police. They work everywhere, and they are everywhere. And unfortunately, they always will be. Racism is a funny thing, because I think it's always going to be a thing. I don't think you'll ever eliminate racism as a concept, as sad as that is, because it's ultimately a self-defeating prospect, especially when you consider that a lot of people would have sided with, you know, the anti-immigration narrative, but difference is always going to be preyed upon by people, always. And if it's not race, it's religion. If it's not religion, it's an area you live in. If it's not an area you live in, it's a profession. If it's not a profession, it'll be some aspect of your physiology. It'll be anything that they can use to distinguish the majority from the minority. That will always be a thing. You'll never ever eliminate it. What has to happen is, again, a truth and reconciliation with each other. The fact that there are people who will always feel the way that they feel. And in a moment where they felt vindicated, they seized what they thought was control over their situations. Now, I'm definitely not here to defend that, because for fuck's sake, man, setting fire to a hotel with people in it is downright, that's murder, as near as makes no difference. And I don't believe any belief that you hold is worthy of you taking the life of another person, ever. It's not even worth you causing harm to another person. I'm not one of these people. Because again, what I was saying earlier about, you know, there's urges in me sometimes to give someone a good smack when I'm really pissed off with them. But you'll never find footage of me getting into a fight with somebody. I don't think I've had. Let me think. I mean, obviously, I've had a million fights with my younger brother, because we're only a year apart, you know, and brothers fight. But in terms of an actual fight with another human being, I don't think I've ever had a fight. I've sparred and boxing and stuff, but even then it's very light, and you know, but you're not trying to hurt each other. Yeah, I've never had a real fight. I never punched a person in anger before. I've always thought, but what if I hurt him? What if I hurt this person? Is it worth it? No, not really. Even if I get a momentary release of endorphins and I feel better about it in the moment, it doesn't solve anything. I've always retained control over myself in those moments because I've always recognized that it was never ever going to be worth it. And again, I bring it back to the notion of control. They felt like they were reclaiming control when they weren't. And part of the failing of the last sort of 10 years of discourse is sort of never really addressing their points directly, just kind of calling them stupid and ignorant and assuming a degree of intelligence or assuming a degree of... They assume a lot about other individuals and the way that they have to think. In the same way that I assumed that the way I thought about battle rap could be vocalized publicly, and it can't. What I said can't be vocalized because there's not enough people that would stand in front of everybody else and agree with me, even if they believed it. In the same way that you saw these uprisings, because I think a lot of people hold these beliefs privately, but never felt comfortable airing them until they were encouraged to do so violently. And that'll happen again. It'll happen again and again. Because again, a lack of control over one's ability to be able to express themselves is something that a lot of people suffer with. I don't really have that problem. I'm sitting here talking to you right now. I've been talking for about 20 minutes. Solidly. There's a lot of people that can't do that. There's a lot of people that wouldn't have the words to articulate that they feel threatened or they feel uneasy, that they feel like something has been taken from them. In the same way that people who have suffered at the hands of anti-immigrant violence, a lot of them can't articulate the fear they feel. Like, I saw people having to board up their properties, man, because they were so terrified that people were just going to turn up and start putting bricks through their windows. And that's so fucked up. The fact that we've evolved to a point where discourse has de-escalated into... And again, I use myself as the example because, look, I sat in a live chat of 30 people who were all baying for my fucking blood. None of them really wanted to hear me out. They were looking for moments to fucking slam dunk on me. Now, am I causing... Again, I can already hear fucking one of them in the back of my head saying, "Oh, so you're calling yourself a victim?" No. I'm trying to... But I am using that to prove my point, though, in the fact that control in discourse is pretty much out the window now. It's impossible to have a real conversation with anybody, mainly because they're conducted on social media, for one, and you can't conduct discourse on social media. It's all... So you're saying that. What you're saying is, well, what about that? Instead of anyone really trying to delve in and understand each other. Like, that's ultimately how I got in trouble, basically, with this whole thing back in fucking January, February, whenever it was, is I just didn't know something and I was asking questions and that was perceived a certain way. But no one was making an effort to try and understand where I was coming from. And that's something I always try and do. I always try at least to retain enough control over my senses and my ability to be able to think through things to try and get to where is the other person coming from. That's why I can't justify any of the stuff that happened with the riots, because I don't believe in exercising violence in order to achieve an outcome. I understand it can be effective, and I understand that there's a temptation to do it. I really do. But I can't endorse it because I don't believe in it. But I can understand how there are people that can't articulate that they feel certain things in ways that can be received by another party that are then willing to at least counter it rather than simply undermine it. Again, I'll give you another example. In the discourse that happened, people were far more quick to insult me personally and look for things that I said to twist them to fit their narratives or to fit something that they wanted to say not necessarily what I actually said, but they want to recontextualize it so it makes me look bad, right? Then actually understanding. Now, there was one person who did, and she ended up coming on and interviewing with me, and we had a great conversation. One person out of 30. Now, again, that's a really low it's a low test group, but if you said one person in 30 is actually willing to listen to what you have to say when you say something that most people don't like, apply that to the country. Imagine that 1 in 30 people feel a certain way but feel that they can't express what they want to say. Even if we all agree, I'm inclined to agree with everybody that thought, look, I'll make my politics clear on this situation. I don't believe immigration's a bad thing, but like everything else, it has to be controlled to a certain degree. Otherwise, you end up in situations where you make the communities responsible for the failings of government. I don't believe in any sort of racial or ethnic quarantining or segregation. In fact, I think it's one of the worst things you can do. I used to work in London, and one of the things that you notice working in London is you go postcode to postcode almost. There's different ethnicities or nationalities of people. And what used to happen was large groups of people would have sort of smatterings of English. A few people would have better grasp of English, and then obviously younger generations, because they go to school, have a very good grasp of English. And then there'd be a core of people who spoke no English at all, because their communities were contingent on them sort of spreading and disseminating information backwards and through, but within their own echo chambers, rather than what should have happened. And this is a fate, and this is something that I think people who complain about immigration fail to recognize as a failing on their part. They never helped integrate people. They always treated them like they weren't part of their communities. They always had a hostility or a coldness or a certain dismissal based on their ethnicity. I'll give you another example. I won't name the gentleman's name, but it's someone local to me. I was outside doing some training, and he came up to me and he said something to the effect of, do you know what the problem is? It's these Chinese students. And I had to stop him immediately by saying, well, two things, fella. Number one, we have lots of different ethnicities of students around here from Asia. We have a lot of Japanese students, a lot of Chinese students, a lot of Korean students, a few from the Philippines, and then there's a whole smattering from Sri Lanka and Pakistan and India and all the way through. There's Sri Lankan, there's... we also then get them through Eastern Europe, through Africa, not quite so many through France. We do get quite a lot from Spain in Northampton. But the idea that he would hone in on the fact that it was just the Chinese and that somehow they were unique in their inability to be able to navigate the world. It was hard in that moment to restrain myself from saying, don't say something so stupid. But it isn't about calling someone that says something stupid. It's about drilling down into what they're actually angry about, what they're actually trying to say, and what they're trying to attribute to something simple, because clearly they lack the facility to be able to think deeply about things. But it doesn't mean that the genesis of the idea can't be attained if you're willing to go through it. Now, I'm not saying that's easy. Having to listen to rhetoric that's really hard, especially if, look, I really hate listening to people be racist about shit, or sexist about shit, or hateful about shit. It's hard for me to listen to because I don't believe in any of it. I genuinely believe that so long as what you're doing doesn't hurt me and I'm not hurting you, then we're all just humans just trying to live our fucking lives, man. But I have to try and understand it, because ultimately you can't just get rid of everybody that doesn't believe in everything you believe in. You have to drill down into it. And if the idea of this gentleman, after probing him a little bit further, was that he was just frustrated with the number of traffic incidents that were occurring as a result of people not having proper self-awareness when walking the street. And I can attest to that. You know, I've nearly run over a couple of people because they just walk into the road. They don't look where they're coming. But it was nothing to do with ethnicity. It was nothing to do with what country they came from. It's the fact that clearly they've never been hit by a car before, and they don't know what it feels like to feel fear that maybe a car's coming and I should probably look both ways before I get hit. That's something they'll learn or they won't. But to sort of hem it in and say this person does this because they're Chinese or because their ethnic origin is something that's apparent to you is ignorant. But at the same time, there's a frustration and a feeling of a lack of control that's being exerted on that person that they feel that they can exert back through the mechanism of racism. And so that's why I feel like it's important to delve into that and to delve into my own sense of control by not immediately attacking the person or immediately dismissing them or undermining their beliefs, even if I disagree with them wholeheartedly, because I feel it's more important to drill down into why they believe what they believe, to see what the actual problem is, to then address that. Because that's far more important, because then hopefully that behavior then resonates and carries over. That's why I was talking in my tweets about why I think control is important. I feel like it's important because its benefits can exude outwards. In the same way that rage and a lack of control can do that too. Like I gave the example at the beginning, like one guy fucked the other guy off. That guy's fucked off now and he's going to drive like a twat and he's going to fuck off a bunch of other people, and then that's going to spread. In the same way, showing how control can be exerted over a situation to make people behave a certain way, it can be done. It's just it's hard work. It really is. I mean, by the way, I did do some other examples, but I don't know if you want to go into them. I was playing this a lot yesterday. The reason being is because this game, a lot of the aspects of the nature of control are explored, especially through the racist prism, because in the game there's a virus that can target people based on their ethnicity, and one of the main goals of the antagonist is to eliminate the English language in order to create a level playing field across the world. And I thought it was an interesting concept, because the idea that, you know, something as simple as language can control people, and the way that language is sometimes used to coerce people into doing and saying and believing things that they wouldn't otherwise have left on their own devices, is a fascinating concept. One I'm not fully equipped to explore, granted, but nevertheless, again, I think you see it when memes take hold. Again, if you take me as an example, again, like I became this figure of, I was reviled. No, I still am. You know, if you mention my name right now, it's an eye roll. It's a fucking, don't talk about him and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, okay, cool. When that wasn't who I was. It wasn't who I was. It just became what I was best known for, which is funny to me, because I probably did more in the last 3 years to independently expose something that I thought was cool than anybody else. I mean, anybody else. And yet that's dismissed, because that's not the narrative that people feel allows them to control what they want to control. And it's hard. But part of my reasoning for going out and muting everything was to regain an element of that, was to say, fine, then I'm out. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to see it. I don't want to be exposed to it. Because I feel like there's a lot of things that are cults without really being cults at the moment. I feel like most fandoms become cults to a certain degree. Football definitely suffers from that. I think battle rap suffers from that too. The people in it, they have this sort of very nihilistic view of everything that doesn't conform, which is very cult-like behavior. Same with football. Same with cartoon fandom, wrestling fandom. It's sad, because again, the death of independent thought, when people can't just say something, and even if people disagree, have the time of day to hear what the person has to say, is troubling to me, because it's also the death of anything new. Like when two rivaling ideas come together and find a new idea that's a compromise or a mix of the two, that sort of embodies the best elements of both, deals with the problems of both, right? That's great. I'd rather have that conversation. I'd rather discuss something with someone I disagree with and find a truth that I was missing, than not talk to someone I disagree with at all, or just embrace my own dogma by only ever talking to people that I agree with. I'd much prefer that. It's why, again, by the way, that the decision to kind of mute and get rid of everything was painful, because it's me effectively having to sever that and not hear the alternate opinion anymore. But I don't want to, because it wasn't something that could be reciprocated. And I feel like that's another point to touch on, is that there comes a point where you have to recognize that you can't reason. That, again, this is part of it, the controlling element, is this idea that you can't exert everything you want on the world. It's not possible. There's going to be times where someone says or does something you don't like. There's going to be times where someone does something to you and you can't do anything back. And you just got to take it. But you've got to retain control over that, and rather than redirecting that anger and that sense of injustice onto something else in order to exert control back onto the world, you have to avoid that where you can. Because that's how I feel like, again, a lot of men in particular start to take it out on the people closest to them. You know, they don't have this ability to be able to redirect and channel things in the proper healthy way. For me, it's training. So I do my weightlifting. It's this. And sometimes I'll just sort of sit and drift off, man. I'm a big fan of breathing exercises. I take a deep breath to let someone know they've annoyed me and that they just need to give me a few seconds so I can recompose myself. Because again, I do struggle with my temper, but it's not something I indulge with very often these days unless someone really pushes me over the edge. And even in those moments, man, I really do try. Because control to me is so much more important than indulging in a moment. You know what I mean? Yeah, like I say, I don't really know what else to say apart from just to say, like, at the moment, I get it's easy to look at other people doing stuff and think, well, they're doing it, so I should do it too. I get it's very easy to look at other people saying and doing things you don't agree with and just calling them stupid. Even things that you would find abhorrent. I would urge people, though, that control extends to yourself on the world in so much as how you can always carry yourself a certain way. You can always say things that you know you can look back on with pride later. Like the live spaces that we did. I will watch that one back without an ounce of, I did everything I felt I could. I tried to humor them. I tried to be understanding where I could be. I was there. You know, I didn't have to turn up for that. And yet, the changing of the narrative was always there. The pouncing was always there. Even so much as the fact that they changed the name of the stream. That kind of irked me. Because the idea that it was like, oh, look, we got all this stuff and da-da-da, all these views. And it's like, yeah, but the name of the stream was my name first. You tried to use me to sell the stream and why people should tune in. Then you took it out afterwards because that didn't fit your narrative anymore because you realized you were going over the top. Narratives are dangerous things because a lot of times people choose to believe what they want to believe rather than what they should believe. It's a Tyrion Lannister quote, and it's I love it quote. It's a fantastic one. You should never believe something just because you want to believe it. I love that. I think that's a great way of looking at things. You should always be searching for the truth, not your truth. Your truth is a very subjective thing, and it changes with every moment. The truth is a different thing entirely. Things like racism, the truth is it's stupid. It's a dumb way of looking at the world because inherently it serves no purpose in modern society whatsoever. All it does is permeates hatred. And alliances built on hatred are fragile at best. And they never solve anything. Because what happens if you get rid of everyone that fits that particular set of criteria and you've still got the same problems? You look for someone else to blame. That's why racism is ultimately a futile attempt to exert control over the world. It's a scapegoat tactic. Rather than looking at the problems that we have from a rational lens of who is ultimately responsible and dealing with that. But that's a long and complicated process, and it's just so much easier to say, hey, that person's got different skin color to me. He must be my enemy. Rather than realizing these are the same people that have lived side by side with you for years. These are the people that take care of your kids at school. These are the same people that look after you when you're sick. These are the same people that protect you when there's an assault and you call the police. But it never occurs to you in that moment. because it's so much easier to give in to that hate, to lose control, to give into hate, to give into anger, to give into to fear, to ignorance. This idea that you can't understand something, therefore you must hate, you must fear it. And again, man, I'm not saying this, none of this makes me better than anybody else, by the way, but one of my big things is if I'm scared of something or I fear something, my initial response these days is to at least to try and understand it. Let me try and fucking figure it out so it doesn't have the hold that it wants to have over me. That's time consuming, and it can be very, very unforgiving sometimes. People don't like people that ask questions. Again, take it from me. Again, I'm not being funny. I was labelled a media member. I didn't ask to be a media member. And yet, I ask questions and I get the shit kicked out of me. Why? Because people aren't always comfortable with the answers. Sometimes those questions ultimately ask us to review ourselves and how we look at the world and how we've treated each other and how we've entered the world. And again, it's a painful process to go through. But it's something you have to do. We all have to. If we're going to make our way, we have to. We have to fucking... We have to understand things better. We have to try and at least get to the root cause of these issues. It has to be done. And if you don't, then you'll just see these same things happening over and over again. Just through different lenses. Again, that's why I will say it once more. Racism is one of the dumbest ways of trying to look at the world. Because it doesn't solve anything. Nothing can be attributed to racism that you could systemically prove in any way, shape or form. So anyone looking at it through the prism of insert ethnic minority are the root cause of this because is just, you're not looking at it correctly. You're trying to attribute something because of rage, fear and indifference. And you shouldn't let those things govern or guide you. Ever. Again, maybe that's wishful thinking on my part. I don't know. I just know that I try not to let ignorance, rage, and a need to control my world govern how I should think and feel about things. I try and think about things from the perspective of trying to keep a balance and an equilibrium with myself and the world. I understand that the world does not revolve around me, but it can't... I can't just passively let things happen either. You have to draw your own lines, and it's not easy navigating it, I grant you. Not everyone's equipped to in the same way. In the same way, again, like I said, assuming a level of understanding of another person is ignorant of yourself. You should try and remember that not everyone... You might be the smartest person in your world. You might be the most articulate, the most charming, the most charismatic, the best looking. You might have advantages that blind you to other people's ability to be able to do the things that you say you should be doing. And part of humility is recognizing that and trying your best to bridge that gap where you can, so that when you see, not necessarily the riots are kind of, hopefully they're an anomaly, but when you're seeing things go on just in your day-to-day life, man. And I'm not talking about social media, right? So dunking on people on social media is easy. It's very easy to sit behind your fucking phone and have opinions and virtue signal and all the rest of that sort of stuff. I'm talking about when you're out and about in the world and you see something that just plainly isn't right. It is incumbent upon people to actually take a stand sometimes and highlight things, but not in an overtly aggressive or violent or dismissive way. It's up to everybody to kind of be a little bit better and everyone to kind of be there for everybody. And that's hard work, but it sure as hell gotta be easier than picking up the pieces of all this shit that keeps happening, right? I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I'd sooner live in a more community-facing place than in the individualistic nature of society that we're cultivating for ourselves right now, where everyone's allowed to carve their own narratives rather than view the world through the prism of, well, what do other people think and feel? How does that conflict with mine? How do we reconcile that? I don't know. maybe I'm being naive in that thought process, but I just know that my view of it is a lack of control on all parties' sides. I see just lack of control everywhere I look at the moment. And as a result, you see a lot of negativity and things that permeate as a result of that lack of control that I don't see in my own life, because I do recognize that keeping certain things in my control, even if they're hard, even if they come at personal sacrifice, or they preclude me from doing things that I would want to do otherwise, ultimately pays dividends in ways that ultimately is worth it to me. And that's just... And it's hard. I really do recognize it's hard. I don't know. I've been waffling for a little while, by the way, and I noticed no one's left any comments or anything like that. So maybe I'll wrap it there. Yeah, I guess I've said everything that I need to say. You know, like I said, I've been meaning to talk about the riots because they were very upsetting to me. Not just because of me, but because obviously of seeing my neighbors and my community fucking fear for their goddamn homes was hard. And then just seeing people go about their daily lives and struggling is hard. And there's only so much I can do before I feel like I'm exerting myself on people and making demands of them, rather than just what I'm trying to do, which is to set an example and just follow it and not let people kind of take me off that path. I don't know. I'd be curious to people what people think about what I've said, but I won't ask anyone to put their hands up and say anything, because, you know, who wants to, again, kind of opposite to what I'm saying, who wants to actually say, you know, who wants to say what they really think? Because, yeah. Anyways. Yeah. All right. We'll wrap it there. Anyways, I want to say thank you for joining me on this very waffle-tastic edition, I should say, of the Halcyon Show. Rest assured, I have actual legitimate content coming soon. It's probably not going to be next week now, though. I'll apologize for that in advance. Getting a template and a framework for this new series is proving more difficult, and I've had a few distractions over the course of this week, so you're just going to have to forgive me for that. It will drop when it drops, but I will keep you posted as best I can in the interim period. But yeah, so thank you for the few of you that join me live. I appreciate you. For anyone that catches this after the fact, yeah, sorry I waffled for so long. Hopefully you could skip through some of the worst bits of it. And yeah, once again, as always, and I say this at the end of every episode now, I grant you that, but it's because I sincerely mean it. Wherever you are, whoever you are, I hope you are taking good care of yourselves. I hope you're staying safe. I hope you're okay in your own little world. And I hope something that I've said today has resonated with you, and you can take something and just go away with it and do something with it that's helpful to maybe not yourself, but to the people around you. And we go on upwards from here. So yeah, I've been your host, Lorne Risley, host of the Halcyon Show. And I guess I'll see you on the next episode of the Halcyon Show.